What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And today is definitely no exception. Of course, it is week 5 of the Alex Murdaugh trial. Of course, he is the former embattled South Carolina attorney out of Colleton County, accused of killing both his wife, Maggie, and his son, Paul. Back in 2021. And that, my friends, is just a fraction of the story. Today's best guests, and they are good ones. You are looking at Dr. Laura Pettler. She is one of the most accomplished forensic scientists in all the land. She has invented groundbreaking technology. You heard me right. Invented groundbreaking technology and methods based on her published research in staging, behavior, and homicide cases, death investigation methodology, and crime scene reconstruction, which led to recognition as the most influential woman in forensics in the world today in 2019, and is a world-renowned expert, again, as I said, in staged murder. Dr. Pettler was also part of Dr. Oz's the Oz Team forensic criminologist for the Emmy-winning Dr. Oz. Now, Brian Sheely, the man, the sharp-dressed man in the beard. We got two brothers from the great state of South Carolina. Brian worked for 5 years at the Richland County, South Carolina Public Defender's Office before establishing the Sheely Law Firm. Brian has spent the majority of his legal career defending the most violent charges, including clients charged with murder, armed robbery, rape, and burglary. And his brother, Luke Sheely, a native of South Carolina as well, began his career as a public defender before switching to criminal defense. Luke has trained in the Colorado method of capital voir dire at the Colorado School of Law, and also in death penalty defense at the Santa Clara University School of Law. In 2013, Luke was appointed to his first death penalty case. He and other team members were tasked with literally trying to save a man from execution by the state of South Carolina. That is no small feat. Please, everyone, follow us on Facebook, Twitter. We're at Podcast STS, on Instagram as well. You can also listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Please support us on Patreon. And please, you can also follow us and support us on YouTube. We would love for that. Welcome to one and all. And thanks to STS Nation coming out in full force tonight. To the lawyers, Brian and Luke. Brian in the beard. Is Alex Murdaugh going to start the day tomorrow on that witness stand? What do you think?
I think no, and only because I believe there's going to be some other witnesses that the defense is going to put up first. I still think we're going to have a pathologist and some other witnesses. And Luke and I have been discussing this, ad nauseum, but we honestly believe that for him to have an opportunity, any chance to be acquitted on these two murder cases, he's going to have to testify and explain himself. This case is so unique, both factually and some of the evidentiary rulings that have kind of bore out with Judge Newman, because of the financial crimes that have come in as a motive. Normally this kind of stuff doesn't get in, but the state has done a good job of bootstrapping it as a motive, even though in South Carolina, motive is not required as an element of murder. But, there's so many people that know him now call him a liar, and they don't know him. And then with the kind of his own admission of lying about the roadside shooting, that's real powerful. I mean, if he doesn't testify, then he's sitting here with his own voice on a recording in evidence that the jury gets to hear, confessing to lying. And so without his voice live explaining everything that's going to happen and how he didn't do the murders, and maybe plausibly giving an explanation about, who he believes did it, he just goes down. So I do feel like he'll be testifying if he wants any chance at being acquitted. I just don't think it's going to be tomorrow. I think it's going to be more likely Friday, or maybe even with the way the case has been playing out, potentially even Monday.
And we're going to get to Luke in 1 second. I just want to keep peppering in comments here because STS Nation is what makes it all happen. Jay Thomas Reset, a friend of the show. He's always on, and we appreciate that. Nope, won't take the stand. So it sounds like Brian was taking me literally about first thing in the morning, but Brian thinks it could happen on Friday or even Monday, and it doesn't seem like there's any way the defense is resting and finishing and wrapping its case by Friday. But Millie writes here, Luke, and I'll let you take this one. I think that motion asking Judge Newman to give parameters regarding Alex's testimony was to reiterate to Alex, and therefore the defense, it would be a very bad idea for him to testify. I think there's a chance he will testify. Just so people know what Millie is talking about, this morning, Jim Griffin, the defense attorney, basically said, hey, if we put Alex Murdaugh on the stand, we don't want the state talking to him about financial crimes. And Judge Newman said, buzz off, in so many words. But Luke, to you, same question as your brother. Will he take the stand? And if not, is it because of what Millie is suggesting here? There's too many wounds that could be opened up.
Well, he's going to have to take the stand if he wants any chance at a hung jury or an acquittal. I don't know that I agree with Millie. I think that's very creative, but I think they're really setting the record for appeal. I mean, they argued against all the financial crimes coming in. They argued against the roadside shooting incident coming in because it's evidence of bad character. The state said it's evidence of motive, or that the defense lawyers opened the door. So I think what Jim Griffin was doing today was saying, Judge, he's got a right to testify. We need him to testify, but if he does, we want you to limit the cross-examination. But cross is cross. If it's in evidence, you get questioned on it. That evidence is part of this case, right or wrong. The appellate courts will say perhaps one day, but they're really kind of preserving the record for error, saying, look, Judge, make a ruling. Judge says no, get out of here. So that's another preservation moment. And then if he testifies, which he has to, if he's going to have any chance out of this, then if they cross him 6 ways from Sunday about financial crimes and stolen money from law partners and the Satterfield theft, then he has to answer that. And he looks terrible. He looks like a liar. And it really hampers his own ability to, as the defense would say, to testify, about not being the killer. But I think if the lawyers wanted him to not testify or strongly hint at that, they just turn to him and say, oh, buddy. But I think, you got to think about what's needed in the case. And you also got to think about kind of the clay, so to speak, you're working with. We've had a lot of clients that didn't have great clay. And so it took a lot to mold them into something that could survive a cross-examination. I think Alex, everything we're hearing about him, it has probably some decent clay, can probably present well as no dummy. The question is, can he get past all the lies? So, but he has to testify in order to get out of this. It's just, will he just get totally destroyed, or will he come through it with some credible explanation?
And I've heard a lot of defense lawyers on this show and others say that lawyers are the absolute worst witnesses because they think they know best. And that could be a cautionary tale for Dick Harpootlian. And Blue Jays writes, they keep saying he's a people person. I think he wants to talk to the jury. No way does Dick Harpootlian want him anywhere near that stand. Followed by Joseph Tourney. I highly doubt he takes a stand. He would be shooting himself in the foot. The state has not presented enough evidence. Dr. Pettler, you are one of the world experts in forensics. So as it pertains to that, we saw just this week Dick Harpootlian crouching down with a forensics expert talking about how this bullet entered at a low angle. From a forensic standpoint, at this stage of the trial, what is really standing out to you that either is going to help Alec or really hurt him? And I suppose let's start with the latter. Forensically speaking, what will hurt Alec the most right now?
This trial has been very complicated, and for me, it didn't need to be so complicated. Coming from the DA's office, when I was young and in homicide, at a young age, we didn't do cases like this. We presented cases that were staged and circumstantial in very clear, concise ways. And so for me, there's just a tremendous amount of additional information that might just not be necessary for the jury to consider, because I think that they got lost in some of the maybe got lost in some of the DNA evidence, maybe got lost in some of the financial evidence. And then when it comes to the forensics and the actual scene, and then how you tie that into the digital evidence, and then now the trajectory evidence, I just think that it is a tremendous amount of information, and it needed to be pared down. That's been my position the entire time. Forensically, that's been my position, is that it's too much, because first of all, staging is a function of the victim-offender relationship. If there is no relationship between a victim and an offender, there is no staging. And where we see staging the most is in intimate partner homicide. And even though that they're alleging that this is technically an intimate partner homicide, they're alleging that the motive for killing, meaning the state, what they're trying to argue is that the state, their position is that he's trying to hide financial crimes. But the crime scene is a reflection of the personality of the offender. And the crime scene is reflective of anger. And of course, there's elements of power and control. We see overkill, and we see other elements that are reflective of other aspects of the aggression, the anger, and sometimes the motive for murder is just so simple. It's just to state anger. And I think that the timeline leading up to the murders, forensically speaking, does put him in with triggers. And so you have to consider this behavioral chain when you're looking at the physical evidence in the forensics, that there's a trigger, then there's an emotion, then there's a thought, and then there's a behavior. Well, what's the trigger? And for me, it's just
And we are having some issues with Dr. Pettler's picture, so we're going to let her try to reestablish there and pick it up with Luke and Brian, because we are losing her shot, as you can tell there. She is just north in the great state of North Carolina, not far away, but technology is a tricky thing. So you'll see Marie P says, got my iced coffee and I'm ready. And I've got my iced water and I am ready here. Got a comment here from Dave who says, I think the jury will convict him based on everything presented so far. I think it is actually in his best interest to testify at this point. Plus, it will be nice watching his testimony shredded. Brian, before we let you add it in terms of answering this question, is there anywhere you can go in South Carolina right now where someone is not either talking to you or asking you about this case? Have you ever seen anything like this in your home state?
I've never seen anything like this. And we've had a lot of major trials in South Carolina. I mean, we've had Susan Smith, we had Tim Jones, we had Dylan Roof, and we've had major trials here. But this trial is way more covered and from its infancy, even before he was charged with murder, in part due to who he was. I mean, this is like a generational legacy family, working for a law firm that his grandfather or great-grandfather established. He's got all the hallmarks of wealth and power and privilege, and it just makes for a great story. The other thing to that, and we've had major trials over the past decade, 20, 30 years, but even coverage like, let's say, O.J. Simpson, which primarily was covered in news and print. And now we have, forums like this, and we have, internet bloggers and a lot of kind of investigative journalists that can really just take a cell phone and a keyboard and go investigate themselves. And so it's been analyzed and investigated well before SLED even got involved almost. I mean, the Murdaugh family was being covered. So I've never seen anything like it. And I think it's partly due to kind of how we are as a society. I mean, everyone loves, murder trials, and not loves the killing, of course, but loves the intrigue. I mean, criminal law is the type of, they don't make, I joke around, they don't make, legal shows about tax lawyers, right? They make shows about, criminal defendants in a courtroom with prosecutors and criminal defense lawyers. So it's always been, really intriguing stuff, but I just think it has a lot to do with who he was and kind of how unraveled, and then the killings themselves, and then people on the ground early on have been really investigating heavily, and not just major news outlets. I think most of the groundwork has been done by people that, are just have their phone and a laptop and have been really banging away at this story. So I think that's really the biggest reason that it's so widely covered and there's so much intrigue.
And that's all you really need today is one of these, a microphone and a laptop, and you're good to go. And hopefully Dr. Pettler will be good to go in just one moment. But first, Stu's here has a comment, and I'm going to toss this over to Luke. Hi, all. Whoa, can't believe they're even considering putting AM on the stand. The defense is looking scared. One of the things that came up in our discussion last night, Luke, and I'm curious to get your take on this, is the defense hasn't really put forth a theory as to what happened. And people have been critical of the state, saying, well, it's desperation and empathy after these financial crimes, but at least they've given some sort of motive. I know it's not incumbent on either to present a motive, but does the defense need a theory here to get the jury hooked?
They certainly do. It's kind of like always be closing. So it can't, in a case like this, it can't just be poking holes in the state's theory. But they did sprinkle in a theory that was pretty quickly shut down, and which was the grounds for opening the door to the roadside attempted suicide. I mean, if you recall, Jim Griffin was cross-examining the lead investigator and doing quite a good job of kind of scoring some points about how they always had Alex Murdaugh in the circle of suspicion, and it's kind of his job to get it out, but you didn't look at this and you didn't look at that. And everything was going pretty well until he started talking about cousin Eddie. And of course, at this point, the financial crimes have already been testified to extensively. And so the state's own witnesses got out the, essentially $500,000 of $50K installments to cousin Eddie that was never really explained. That's a bunch of money. And then Jim Griffin, lawyer for Alex Murdaugh, says to the lead investigator, and you were aware that he had these payments to Eddie? Yes. And he was, an opioid addict, and these were for opioids, $50K a week. Yes. And and of course, that's a shocking number for opioids, but nevertheless, and he kept kind of going that line and saying, and you were aware that Eddie was tied in with the Cowboys, this particular gang down there. And you were aware that Eddie owed money to the Cowboys. And, the lead investigator didn't really dispute that. He just was aware, and they kind of said, and you're aware that some of those guys have DNA in your database, and you never tested that, and you could have done that. So to me, it's the only thing that's been floated is some type of Alec, through his opioid addiction, got in deep with a local criminal, cousin Eddie, who's his supplier, but that he got in deep with the local gang, and that both those guys got in over their heads. It seems to be what they're floating. Perhaps kind of like in Ozark, you have a rich target like a Murdaugh or a Jason Bateman character, and the bad criminal element says, all right, well, this looks good. You're going to wash my money, or you're going to pay us a lot for protection. Who knows? But it was only floated, and then Judge Newman allowed that to open the door and get into the evidence of the attempted suicide, which the defense had been trying to keep out, and everything kind of went off the rails. So it's something like that. That's why I think Alex Murdaugh, if they have any chance, whether he wants to or not, or whether anybody I don't think he's relishing that. And I think obviously as a defense lawyer, it takes so much preparation to have your client ready to take the stand. But I think the only way he even puts that idea in the mind of any jury is by talking about it from his own personal experience. He's going to have to bring out their receipts, bring out the calendar book, and talk about, if it was someone else, how do you know? Why would you believe that? It can't just be throwing, crap on a wall. It has to be concrete evidence. So we'll see. But that's why I think he has to take the stand. I don't think anybody wants to, and it's going to be super perilous, and he's going to get really crucified on his lies. And so the question is, throughout all that, can there be a grain of truth that a jury could latch on to make him not the killer?
I want to get back to that in a moment. I want to give Dr. Pettler another shot here. Hopefully the connection is going to stay strong. But Dr. Pettler, you're a regular on Court TV as well as many other shows, and you've been around many high-profile cases. How does this one compare, and what differentiates it, if anything?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that we're seeing a tick in the world of staged murders, where when juries are not told why a killer would want to have the victims dead, that they are quit. And that's definitely something that we've noticed in other high-profile trials, that I've noticed that on Court TV and the trials that I've been covering with them. And this one, in comparison, for me, is just, murder is so simple, way simpler than a lot of people try to make it seem. And so for me, this case follows the patterns, a lot of the behavioral patterns, the forensic patterns, the sociological patterns that we see in this type of homicide. And it really just boils down to some type of preceding conflict, the resolution being murder to that conflict, and then the benefit of the victim's death to the offender. And again, the conflict can be something as simple as anger, and then you can have displaced aggression. But I think that there's a lot to be said about maybe the fact that Mark Tinsley testified that he was going after Alex for $10 million. And he was going after Alex for $10 million because, I'm sorry, he was going after Alex for $10 million in relation to the boat wreck, the boat crash incident, and Alex didn't have $10 million. And the reason that the $10 million bill was coming in was because of Paul. And we heard testimony today about Paul, and I thought that the witness was trying to keep it fairly concise. But he was talking about, that Paul could kind of push the envelope a little bit, and if he would tell him, kind of rein it in. And so I don't know Paul as a decedent, but we haven't heard a lot about Paul or Maggie and their relationships with Alex. So, I think this is actually a much simpler situation than what it's been presented to be, really, because we see these stage cases all the time. And if you remove all of the stuff with Alex Murdaugh, like who he is as a person of a dynasty and all of these things, if you just pare him down to just a person who was in debt, a person who was being exposed, and a person who was angry, this looks like many other high profile or staged murder cases, or murder cases in general that we see every single day.
Dr. Pettler, how do you define a staged murder? What is a definition of a staged murder?
Staging is a form of communication. So it's basically the way that an offender is trying to communicate that something happened. They're trying to make you buy the oral, the written, the visual, and the gestural evidence that they produce. So so to speak, really. Like I like to think of stagers as like executive producer, where they write a script, they cast it with a cast of characters, they construct and build all the props, they bring in all the sets that they need, they pick the location, they pick the time, the date, they pick everything, and then everything they do is pursue it to meeting their needs. And so you always have to ask in a case like this, what is staging? Well, staging is linguistic evidence, staging is visual evidence, and staging is gestural evidence by the offender towards law enforcement and other relevant parties in pursuit of apprehension and for the purpose of misdirecting the investigation. And we know that Alex tried to misdirect the investigation from the very first night when he said that he was not at the kennels.
That audio is clinging on, but hopefully we can keep Dr. Pettler alive, so to speak, as we go here. Probably a bad phrase for this discussion. It's all good. Luke and Brian, I think I'll toss this one to you. Assuming Alex Murdaugh gets on the stand, he will obviously be cross-examined by the state. How long could that last? Because I'm thinking if I'm Creighton Waters, I want to ask this guy about everything imaginable, everything under the sun that can point guilt toward him.
You know, as tired as the jury most likely is, having to focus so intently, and, you know, these are not superhumans, they're just ordinary people. And that's why you want them on a jury. You want them using their life experiences. So, you know, they're everyday people. So they're losing attention. But I hate to say this, but if it is done the right way by the prosecution, then they've got him up there 3/4 of a day minimum if they're doing it the right way. And then, you know, so between direct and cross, it could easily be a day of testimony. It'll be, you know, obviously he would be cross-examined on all of his financial crimes to show the state's theory of motive. You know, he would have the right to assert his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent on those charges. However, you know, I don't think that would be a good look for him. I mean, I really think he's in the position to choose one or the other. Does he want to get up and explain, you know, his innocence? I mean, he's presumed innocent, but does he really want to give Lindy a theory to the defense to help explain his actions, explain his lies? And if he were my client and Luke and I have wrestled with this, I think we'd have to be sacrificing him being subjected to cross-examination on the financial crimes and him explaining that situation in order to gain credibility with the jury, to have them believe whatever he's going to tell them concerning the murders. I think in his mind, he would much rather, you know, go down on the financials. And don't get me wrong, he's going down on the financial crimes. I mean, it's so crazy because they've been allowed in this case as a motive. And so we kind of feel like he's being tried for them as well, but he is not. This is a trial for the double murders of his wife and his son. So I think it would be a bad look if he pled the Fifth. I think he would have to just explain that in a mea culpa kind of way, gain credibility, explain the lies, don't hide from the truth if the truth is going to be what sets him free. And I think that's the only shot he has, but I think it could be certainly a day of testimony at a minimum. I mean, we've had clients in double murder cases and complex murder, double murder kind of shootouts with cops after a murder high-speed chase. And it's a day of testimony. And that last case we did wasn't even as complex as this from how much evidence is in already. So I think it's a day. I think he's got to do it to have a shot. I think if he doesn't testify, he's going down.
LMF3 writes, one of my two favorite streams on YouTube. So happy to catch you live. So happy that you are. Wish you said it was number one, not one of two, but I'll take it. I'll take what I can get. Joseph Turney, Luke, for you, when do y'all, in my South Carolina accent, think this trial will be all wrapped up? They said the end of this week. You guys love it when Northerners, I'm a Jersey guy, say y'all, and I can't say it right. And then I found out that bless your heart isn't what it really means. I didn't know that either. I found that out, though, the hard way. But when does this all end? There's no way this is ending on Friday, is there, Luke?
I don't think so. It's been pretty slow going. I think there's certainly going to be a pathologist. There might be a firearms expert. I mean, don't forget that Paul Greer for SLED was pretty damaging for the defense.
Wow, that seems like a lifetime ago.
It does. I mean, woo. Because, I mean, he's saying, yeah, the gun we have, the Blackout 300, isn't the gun, but it's a family gun. And we know that's due to shell casings being cycled through, leaving particular marks, not test fire comparisons, but just cycling through and ejecting. I think it seemed like they might want to have someone to touch on that, but they're kind of now embracing the concept of loose guns around the farm and Paul not being very tight with the guns, that were maybe these potential other killers could have just crept up and taken advantage of that. So maybe not, but definitely going to have pathologists. I mean, if they don't call Alex Murdaugh, then that will be a lot shorter, but it'll be a lot more guilty. A guilty verdict more quickly. So I think maybe mid next week, early next week. I might be surprised. I mean, we're hearing from people we didn't expect to hear, like the daytime caregiver today, who really was quite helpful and interesting. Was kind of the other side of the coin to Shelley Smith. Shelley Smith's the nighttime. We got the daytime. They both love that family. They've both been there a long time. But Shelley sees the tarp. Miss Mixon doesn't see any blue tarp. And Miss Mixon says, well, M was having a bad day. And I called Alex and told him, get over here tonight because you need to see your mama. And he did. So that was pretty interesting and helpful today. But I think we could have some more witnesses like that. But I don't think we finished this week.
And, it's interesting. This trial undulates like the ocean. One day you think the state has had the next, the defense. Today I'm getting the sense that people collectively are feeling stronger about the state's case and a possible conviction. All I heard yesterday was a hung jury. Blue Jays here writes, the prosecution still has to tie up all the circumstantial evidence. I think it's 50-50 on the jury convicting. My friend Lil Beth is writing in to say, hit that like, STS Nation. Please do that. That helps the algorithm and makes my 8 and 7-year-old daughters happy. And then Jody Johnston writes, and this one is for Dr. P, and hopefully her audio holds up here. Jeffrey Scott Morgan, who's another forensics whiz, he made a great point today, and I'm paraphrasing. After a crime like this, you'd think the family/law partners would be in front of a bank of microphones giving a press conference. Everyone on the family side has been pretty quiet. We did a whole show, by the way, about who was Maggie Murdaugh. What did she mean to a lot of people? But he's in the same world as you. This isn't necessarily a forensics question, Dr. P, but what do you think of what Joseph Scott Morgan suggested?
Joe Scott, he's a friend and a colleague for sure. And can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're better now, I think.
Yeah, because I figured out what the problem was and I tried to fix it. So hopefully it will be okay now.
Excellent.
Yes. So yes, I mean, you definitely would think that. You would definitely think that their law firm would make a statement. I mean, LPA makes statements all the time on different things for different reasons. I think that they're maybe just trying to protect themselves, and I can understand why, and I can understand why they're so angry. And this is pathology always trumps intelligence, and this is one of those kinds of cases where the pathology of Alex Murdaugh was most important. Money was the most important thing to him, and his behavior is very, very illustrious of the way he thinks. And so, all of the crying and all of these things in the courtroom, all of it goes to, we have plenty of killers. The prisons are full of them who cry over the people that they kill because they may be it's maybe self-serving that they're upset that they got caught. And then B, I mean, they could genuinely be sad that if it's a domestic violence homicide, that they no longer have a victim to abuse. C, it could be that they are genuinely sorry for what they do or what they did, the lives that they destroyed, the dreams and the people that they hurt. And so there's lots of reasons to see that such emotionality, but also the emotionality from his former friends and his former law partners who, you know, when somebody does that kind of thing to your business, the thing that you've worked so hard for your whole entire life, I mean, it's just, it's a betrayal. It's just a deep betrayal that they're all trying to deal with. So I can understand why they would not get in front of microphones either, because there have been things in my own career where people probably thought that I would be in front of a microphone or one of the legal reps for LPA, and we've declined comment.
And your audio is so much better, which is such a source of I don't know. It makes me feel much better.
Yes, because it was trying to pick up my earbuds. The mic was trying to come through my earbuds for some reason instead of this mic here. So I had to fix it. So I'm not very good with tech stuff. Sorry.
I am not either, but I hope STS Nation appreciates all this. There's a lot of tech stuff that goes into it too. By the way, the end of that comment from Joseph Scott Morgan, standing in front of the mics, pleading for help to find the killer or killers of Maggie and Paul. Especially, yeah. So it went on, considering how some were fearful for their safety. I didn't see that. It was a little further down. But back to you, Brian. So we had Mark Ball, who is a former colleague and friend of Murdaugh. He was on the stand today as well. And, you know, it's funny. I kind of joke every time an attorney says something, I kind of believe what they're saying because you guys are very persuasive. And it looked like it was going well for the defense. And then the state ends up cross-examining them. And I thought, you know, the bottom sort of fell out because the first question Creighton Waters asked for the state was, he was pretty good at hiding who he really was, wasn't he? And Ball answers, obviously. And then goes on to reiterate that Alex Murdaugh didn't tell him once or twice, but told him 3 times that he was not at the kennels that night. Is the defense not doing their due diligence with their witnesses here? Do they know this was going to come out? Because when I hear 3 times, to me, it's a sealed deal. He made it abundantly clear he was not at those kennels when the murders happened until that audio picked him up being there.
Right. You know, I think this is another reason that I believe that they're going to have Alex Murdaugh testify. I mean, this lawyer, who was a great witness in terms of his storytelling ability, and he seemed very credible. He was a victim of Alex Murdaugh's financial crime, but he also was able to personally vouch for what he believed was his own relationship with Alex Murdaugh and his family. I mean, their children went to school together, that kind of thing. And he worked with him as a law partner. So, yeah, I mean, I just think that it's all of these witnesses like this that are, you know, he was a little bit unique because he was also at the crime scene. So, he was a financial witness that had personal information. He's a victim of financial crimes. He's angry. I think he said that. You know, I'm angry, you know, and it didn't even take Creighton Waters having to cross-examine him on the, you know, but you didn't know him really, did you? I mean, he just said that on direct with Jim Griffin. You know, I never thought he would ever do anything like that. But you know what? After September, when we learned about the financial malfeasance, I just didn't know him the way I thought I did. And I kind of, as a defense lawyer, I kind of cringed a little bit because I hate to think that Jim Griffin just walked into that. And so it just makes me believe that they already are kind of accepting they're going to have to get Alex Murdaugh up on the stand to talk about that. But yeah, he was powerful in terms of a state perspective because, yeah, he lied to me 3 times personally about not being at the kennels. He also lied about that issue to all the law partners. He had some other interesting, you know, I think they put him up there to kind of have him there as a smart witness, a lawyer who was at the crime scene because he's a personal friend and thought the SLED investigation was a bit sloppy, and he was noticing, the shotgun pellets in the windowsill, and he didn't like the way the rain was allowed to drip on Paul's body. The one thing that really, I think, was a huge win for the state, that I don't even know if it was intended, was that he observed a golf cart on the left side of the Moselle main house. And, with a lot of the phone data, the forensic cell phone data being extrapolated from these devices, I mean, it's all about steps. And I think, there's been a lot of testimony concerning, Maggie's steps and Alex Murdaugh's steps not necessarily being, no pun, but in step. And so if he had her phone, they would be identical in terms of the steps, but they're not tracking at the same time, unless you were in a motorized vehicle, and that would not pick up the steps. So I'm kind of waiting for someone to try to explain that potential theory about how he could maybe be at the kennels, which clearly he was, because his voice is ID'd by everybody, and at the same time not be tracking those steps. And so that there's a golf cart that's coming out of this witness that I think was really designed to be kind of a character witness, and also a kind of sloppy investigation by SLED, because he's not a criminal lawyer. He's a plaintiff's lawyer, but he's noticing things, so I thought that he was meant to be a good defense witness, and it just was like 95% Creighton Waters owned him, and not in a negative way, not like he dominated him through cross-examination, but it was just, he became Creighton Waters' witness. So I thought he was powerful for the state today.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. Tony Longren writes, I think he will. You see, people here are mixing it up as to whether or not Alex Murdaugh will get on the stand. I think he will. He won't be able to help himself to control the narrative, followed by, I don't believe he will, from Cotton Star, followed by Steus, who says he'll get up there and try and charm just one. Tilo, who is a friend of the show, writes, and Luke, I'll shoot this one to you. If by any chance he's found not guilty, will he be able to walk out of jail? What about the financial crimes? Hadn't he confessed to all that, or will we see more trials? Is he remanded back into custody if it's a hung jury, or if he is acquitted?
Yes. I mean, he's still, and I know he was out for a while on a very significant bond on the murder, and after the roadside shooting. At that point, Judge Newman revoked his bond, and then obviously the financial charges, he kept getting indicted and having bond. I don't know if bond was ever truly set on those charges, or if they just kind of stayed waived or no bond. But yeah, if hypothetically he was acquitted, that bond revocation is done with. He would only be held on the 90 or so financial crime charges. And at some point, bond is about, would you run from court, and would you be a danger to society if you got out? And so I'm pretty sure if the bond was not set on those, his lawyers would be quickly trying to set a bond. And usually on a financial crime, you're not going to get bond denied. I mean, they would take his passport. They might set a very expensive bond, but I'm pretty sure his lawyers would be looking to get him out to deal with those charges. But whether a judge under the microscope gives him a bond or not, all things considered, they might just say, well, he's the safest, he's the most controlled, he's got his addiction under control, he's doing quite fine there in the Alvin S. Glenn Detention Center. That could be a very likely outcome if for some reason he gets through this with a not guilty.
Elf writes here, and I'm going to bring Dr. Pettler back into this. Based on the way the prosecution brought charges, is Alec alone, doing the crime alone? If jury thinks two shooters were involved, do they have to find him not guilty? Laura, there have been a lot of people saying, and this is where people thought Dick Harpootlian was going with this when he was crouching down with his forensics expert, that he was going to bring forward a theory of two shooters. Is that something that's still possibly in play? And if you want to respond to Elf's question.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple things as we're sitting here talking that I'm sitting here thinking. One of the things is we certainly cannot assume the integrity of Alex Murdaugh and what he's telling the court. And so if he were to take the stand, there should be no assumption that because he's sworn under oath that he's going to tell the truth about anything. He is an officer of the court. He has a law license, and he has been lying his entire life. So for that reason, I think that's kind of the foundation of where I'm going here with the forensics. We know that Alex Murdaugh staged his own shooting on the side of a road with a person named Cousin Eddie. He has stipulated to these facts. He told the state this is what he did. He told the investigators that's what he did. We know that he is capable of staging a shooting. We know that he is capable of involving other people. And so even I'm going based here on Elf's idea of, based on the way the prosecution brought the charges against Alex alone, if the jury thinks 2 shooters, do they have to find him not guilty? If there are 2 shooters, if there are 3 shooters, or there are 5 shooters or 10 shooters or 25 shooters, it does not exculpate Alex Murdaugh's involvement. It does not mean that he's not involved. It doesn't mean that he's any less guilty or any less innocent than the person who has actually, person or people who have pulled the trigger or triggers in this case. In North Carolina, which is where I live, not far from Columbia, everybody's charged the same way. If 2 people go and rob a convenience store and they kill a person in the commission of a felony, one person is driving, but one person did the shooting. They're both charged with first-degree murder in North Carolina. So, and I'm not an attorney, but having been in the DA's office for many, many years, the 2-shooter theory, that's fine. I've seen lots and lots of cases over the years where there are 2 people involved, but they only have 1 charged. And you, of course, don't assume the integrity of that one because they're going to point the finger at somebody else. And I agree with you. I thought that this was going to go somewhere else, especially with the witness yesterday who testified to the forensic engineering aspects and to the Pharaoh and all of that information with the trajectories. I thought that is exactly where this was going. And I was very surprised to see where it actually went. So, that I'm sitting here listening to our brilliant attorneys here, and I'm as a forensic criminologist plugging into their skill sets, kind of where I'm coming from on this, and how it ties to the legality of is he guilty or is he innocent? He's involved because he lied to police. That meets his needs. He wanted to characterize himself as a non-participant, and he did that by lying to the police from the jump. And quite frankly, I think he told them the first thing, like primacy and recency are so important in trial advocacy. And he said on the 911 call and to investigators when they got there, this is about the boat case. And to me, that's what it's about. It's about the boat case. It's about the anger of the boat case.
And not only are Luke and Brian, and by the way, Dane Tom, I sure hope he hasn't paid a juror off. That's Alex Murdaugh trial humor right there. Not only are they brilliant, but Z over here, those brothers are hot. Just saying. Brian, who's older? Brian's older, right?
I'm 8 minutes senior, and I'll take any compliment on my appearance as I can get it because they are few and far between.
You guys are twins?
Twins. That's right. Identical twins.
Wow. I didn't know. Wow. And it took a while to get out there. 8 minutes. I got double trouble here. I got twins. I'm looking here. Melissa says over here, they added too much information of his finances side of this and geared away from the murders of his trial. It's just too much for a jury, in my opinion. And then another comment escaped me. I'm sorry, it's Melissa once again, who wrote, this is what I was looking for. I agree. This is extremely overly complex. Luke, is that true? Or is it just you think because it's such a high profile case, but there are so many twists and turns and tributaries and, other deaths involved. So does Melissa raise a good point here?
She does. I think there's a danger if you're a prosecutor of over-trying your case. Clearly here, because the case is largely circumstantial, they really wanted to try to explain why Alex Murdaugh would kill his family if you don't have this documented history of a conflict amongst them or some kind of history of domestic violence, which they don't have. So they really wanted to get into other crimes to establish from their perspective a motive. And it's just there's so many other crimes and so many different facets, from stealing from the law firm, stealing from the Satterfields, trying to defraud the insurance company with the roadside shooting. So it is a lot to undertake. And on the one hand, it's very compelling in terms of he will lie to people that are close to him. He will steal from people that he has a fiduciary duty with. He will lie to law enforcement as well. And you start getting all that. And on the one hand, the state likes that because they can say, look, he's a bad guy. He's a bad guy there. You should believe he's a bad guy here. I mean, that's the definition of propensity evidence, at least in terms of the rule, although they claim it's motive. But it can, I mean, we had probably close to a week of simply financial crimes. And I was looking online at some of my lawyer colleagues and saying, well, I didn't realize that was a lesser included of murder, So it can get daunting, but in the end, or it gives them so much ammunition that when Murdaugh does testify, and I will bet $100 he will, that when he gets up there, that it's just, you lied about this, you lied about this, you lied to people you love, you lied to everybody. No one even knew who you really were, and that is because of the financial crime. So it is kind of overdone and more complex, but that's the way the judge allowed it. And they kind of do need it to explain that perhaps he was trying to distract from impending financial doom. I tend to think that it didn't really distract, but put an international microscope on him. But anyway, they need that because they don't have the gun. They don't have any confession. They don't have an eyewitness. They just have a lot of stuff going on in his life and an inexplicable murder. And thank God for the prosecution. From their perspective, they had this Snapchat video with everybody IDing his voice at essentially just before the murder. So it's long, but it's necessary from the state's perspective. And that's what we got.
Hey, Luke, between you and I won't tell anybody, who's a better lawyer, you or your brother?
Oh, definitely me.
Good answer. Good answer.
In our local area, he's the bad twin, I'm the good twin, per one of our esteemed judges that I will not name here locally. So, yeah,
as long as it's not Dr. Newman. Dr. Pettler, to you, we've heard a lot about blood or lack of blood. And today, Mark Ball, the friend, he testified at 11:37 a.m. to be precise. He testifies he did not see any blood on Alex Murdaugh the night of the killings. He said he and the lawyers were invested in helping out Alec in any way they could and finding out what happened. And the quote is here, everything stopped, the whole world did. That's what Ball said. Would it be humanly or scientifically possible, for that matter, for that kind of horrific double murder to take place? He says he checked the pulses and to basically be clean of blood.
Yes, it's possible to not have blood. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And so that's an old quote from Herbert Leon McDonald, who is the father of bloodstain pattern analysis. And that's where I actually who trained me. So let me address this blood issue because I want everybody watching and listening to think about something for a second. And we touched on this on Core TV, but not in depth. So let me kind of go into it a little bit deeper. When blood leaves the body, it's obviously oxygenated, it's extremely red, it's bright, and it's liquid. And it's similar in viscosity, meaning like its thickness, to milk. So if you think of milk and you think about spilling milk on the floor, it's different than water, for example. So water is thinner. It has a lesser viscosity. So when we're talking about viscosity of blood, and we're talking about June in South Carolina, and Luke and Brian can definitely attest to this. I mean, I live in North Carolina, not far from you guys, an hour and 15 minutes. It's hot in June in North and South Carolina. Okay. It is extremely hot, and it's not as bad as August, but still, nonetheless, it's still hot. So when the blood leaves the body under normal circumstances, and maybe one of the listeners, one of the viewers can find the weather for that particular night and tell us how hot it was. What was the temperature outside? What was the humidity outside? Because all of those variables play into how blood dries. So when the blood leaves the body, it starts drying from the peripheral edge out, from the outer peripheral edge inward. So at 1 minute, you're going to have a 0.5 millimeter peripheral edge. And as the minutes go by, all the way up to like 16 minutes, you're going to then see one little drop of blood be completely dry. Depending on the surface that the blood is on. If it's on something like glass, then once that blood dries, it might stay there or it might flake and blow away. So in order for Alex Murdaugh to have blood all over him, the way that people think of this, like kind of from the Hollywood standpoint, they're assuming that all of the blood is still wet 1 hour later, because he calls 911 at like 10:06, and that is allegedly, according, what the state is arguing, that's more than an hour later. So how much blood is still wet? How much blood is still dry? And if he's touching them, is the blood dry on their bodies? I'm going to argue to you that in my experience, and I have taught hundreds and hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours of bloodstain pattern analysis, and I'm an expert in it. And I really don't think that you might not have blood on you because the blood is actually dry on the skin. And so you have to consider those kind of variables of the way blood actually leaves the body, wet, obviously, and then how fast it dries under the heat of June 2021 in South Carolina.
Wow. That's super interesting. Something that I would never know about unless I heard it from you. And it is fascinating. We had Dr. Henry Lee on, who is an institution himself of forensic science with one named after him. And he always says you have to let the evidence lead the way. He obviously was involved in the O.J. Simpson trial and still says that you've got to follow the evidence, and he followed the evidence in that case as well. Zen Amen says Alex Murdaugh will do himself in and will convince the jury to convict him, not the opposite. And then to this comment from Marie P. They've done a great job painting his true colors, a liar, thief, fraud, drugs. No empathy for hurting people closest to him, really shows character and motive, in my opinion. Luke, since you're allegedly the better of the two attorneys, if you were prosecuting this and you could do one thing differently, what would it be? Silence.
I mean, they've gotten all their wins, really, that they've sought. Even they've gotten some luck. I mean, they really want, if you're a prosecutor, you want to get into other crimes, wrongs, or acts. You claim it's motive, but you really want to show he's a bad guy, and the rules of evidence are designed to prevent against that. Here, the judge allowed the financial crimes in. He wasn't going to let the evidence of the assisted roadside shooting in because there is case law that's very prejudicial for a jury to consider. And then, quite frankly, Jim Griffin, in the judge's mind, opened the door and started talking about the relationship with Cousin Eddie. And so they got that. So what would I have done better? I wouldn't have had a grandstanding, the state rest. I would have been more concise about it. There was a little theatrical moment there from Creighton Waters where, all he had to say is the state rest. And he did have a little theatrical moment, but they're doing a good job. I think they could have brought to life some of the technical data a little better. It was somewhat mind-numbing. You're talking about GPS and OnStar and phone positions, and that stuff can just be dry. But then the reason it all comes in, and then you brought in that Agent Radowski who created that very intense timeline, and he was very lively in taking that raw data into a timeline. So that was worth the wait. But they're doing a fair job. They brought in John Metters just before the trial. We tried a lot of cases with him. He's a seasoned murder case prosecutor. The other prosecutors are more kind of financial crime prosecutors. So I think they loaded for bear. They've got kind of the right pieces in the puzzle. I think they're doing a fairly good job. But, I think to Laura's point, you've got this pretty credible insinuation of two shooters. I think it will be continued to flesh out. And, under the laws of accomplice liability, maybe that doesn't matter, but the state hasn't really tried to address it at all. They haven't in any way, shape, or form tried to even fill in the gap with that other person. They've only said it's Alex Murdaugh. So I think if I was a prosecution, I would want to really explain, well, if you think he's the only shooter, how is he working both guns from different angles at one time? Why would he need two guns of different calibers, makes and models and function? I probably would have tried to address that in some way, because the defense at the end, whether this jury believes Alex Murdaugh's version of who did this, they will get to credibly say the state didn't even try to answer that question for you. So I think I would have done more on that if I'm a prosecutor.
Misperception writes, I thought Mark Ball's testimony turned out to be disaster for the defense today. We kind of touched on that. And Brian says that the state owned that witness. I would have to agree. Then we have a fight going on over here. It's not just Luke and Brian, but Tony. I am a Tony from Australia. And this Tony says, I am a Tony from Massachusetts. But we love all Tonys. And welcome from Australia. Meanwhile, Brian, to you, Randy Ward writes, Jim Griffin has opened many doors. Now, he's supposed to be a really seasoned defense attorney, but I feel like he has had a couple of gaffes here, made a bunch of mistakes, including tweeting stuff out. Curious your thoughts about his performance so far. And then conversely, from what I asked Luke, if you could change, if you were defending Murdaugh, what's the one thing you would do differently?
Well, just regarding Jim Griffin, he has opened some doors here. He's had some unforced errors, and he is a very experienced and well thought of, intelligent lawyer, but not to overly critique, but, his main practice area is really in complex federal proceedings. Many of those don't get to trial. A lot of, what he does is kind of solve a problem on the front end. And if he does it the right way, representing a client very effectively, which is his reputation, he's never going to see a courtroom because he's kind of won the case before trial. And you can see through the testimony his involvement, various places in this case, at scenes, on recorded phone calls. He's doing a lot of front work, which is, his belief that's in the best interest of his client. But, state level trial work, especially on a double murder case, is like a knife fight in a phone booth. And it is just a different animal from a federal trial, a federal investigation. And, it's always easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, he shouldn't have done this or that. But, a lot of his problems that led to door opening moments were really he would score some good points. It was his inability to properly control a witness through kind of advanced cross-examination techniques. Or he would do it for a little bit and then he would let his guard down and he thought he had the witness on his side, and he would ask an open-ended question, as he did with one of Paul's friends who initially the state put up to identify his voice in the kennel video. And he kind of did what in the world can you think of any reason why Alex Murdaugh would do this, and that just wildly opened the door. And that was an unforced error. It really was. And it had to do with kind of witness control issues, and he let his guard down. And similarly with the roadside shooting, that was another unforced error that I think he got a little comfortable because Judge Newman, in my legal opinion, rightly was going to keep out that very prejudicial suicide testimony, because in South Carolina, there's a case it's the Cartwright case, and everyone can look it up, and it kind of goes through the factors for allowing suicide information into a trial. And you got to have a nexus of time, a very close nexus to allow it to come in, because, once it's in, Creighton Waters is going to be able to ask for a jury instruction, and Judge Cliff Newman, his practice is to give written instructions to the jury, not just read them like most judges will do at the state level, but actually give them a copy of it. And they're going to get a copy that says that the jury can infer guilt from his attempted suicide concerning this matter. And that's powerful. And that was an unforced error. It was a wildly unforced error that I think he thought he had won the day on that issue and was kind of trying to float the Cousin Eddie and the payments and the kind of cowboy scenario with the gang. And he just lost control of that issue. So it's easy to kind of do that analysis of a lawyer in the middle of a 5-week trial with tons of witnesses to prepare for and evidence and that kind of thing. But I think those are two critical issues. And sorry, I got a little long on that, but the other question was, what could the defense do better?
Yeah.
Well, I think I just answered that question.
Not open the door.
I mean, so, no one wants to talk about really appeals. I mean, everyone's here for the moment of trial, but the appellate record is pretty strong right now if he goes down. And so, yeah, just unforced errors is the biggest problem that the defense really, they kind of put their foot in their mouth and fumbled that football one too many times when it was really unnecessary. There's a lot of online debate about how can these really smart lawyers do that? They're highly paid, highly thought of, and there's a lot of kind of analysis that you're trying to do that on purpose to then bait the state to call Cousin Eddie. No way, no how were they trying to do that on purpose. That's a post-conviction relief built-in issue. That's a major problem for the reason I just talked about in terms of getting a jury instruction that you can infer guilt from not only his attempt at suicide, but then opening the door to that allowed his own confession to being a liar. Like, we've heard his voice how many times already in the courtroom? We've had 2 in-car interviews. We had let me check on the status of the family murder investigation with the crafty kind of lead case agent that turned into an interrogation. And then the cherry on top of the sundae was his own recorded confession from rehab about admitting to being a liar on a major part of this case. That was just massive. And so if he doesn't take the stand, like I've alluded to, the jury will only hear that one confession to a lie, and it's just so damaging. So too many unforced errors, and it's tough doing a 5-week trial, maybe a 6-week trial. Lawyers get tired, just like the jury gets tired, and those are just big problems in their case.
Understood, and I think all those are really valid points. I brought up this comment because it's from Justice for Dan Markell. Dan Markell is the case that got us, Surviving the Survivor, into true crime. Prior to that, my mom and I were talking about aliens and other things. But Dan Markell was shot in his driveway in Tallahassee in 2014 by 2 now convicted hitmen, allegedly hired by his wife's family. And the ex-brother-in-law is going on trial in Tallahassee in April, and we are going to be all over that case. Dateline's about to do another 2-hour special on that. Unfortunately, there is no shortage of violence in this country and horrific stories. So shout out to Justice for Dan Markell. This is an interesting comment to me from Peach Pie, a perfect name for this subject matter. Many times he literally self-snitches. Third interview, he's asked if anyone might have been present during the 911 call. He responds, and it's a quote, "Obviously, I was the only one out there." To you, Dr. Pettler, number one, it's hard to keep lies straight if that's all you really do. But number 2, to you, I was going to ask you, just generally speaking, about digital forensics. We've obviously heard about OnStar now. Will that be his undoing, digital forensics, and the fact that we're hearing his voice?
That's what I've said that to my team several different times throughout this trial, is that the digital forensics, the digital evidence has been extremely strong, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think that it's been, I think that they've done I don't collect that type of evidence, so I can't speak to that. Like you're saying, it's outside of my area, but I think that they got a lot of the digital evidence from very credible sources. And a crime scene investigation or any kind of homicide investigation, death investigation, it's always a reflection of the education, training, and experience and resources and time and all of those things of the investigators. And I know that they put a lot of time into this, and especially you could see it with the digital evidence specifically. They had a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of demonstrative type evidence to explain all of these different elements of how the phone moves or how the OnStar moves or something like that, as opposed to, the absence of evidence that basically, to me, the prosecution was just kept saying over and over again, when you're comparing the forensic digital evidence to other types of evidence in this case, we're just telling you basically what we don't have. Like you were saying about the blood, and could they have been the digital evidence been part of this that's going to support a guilty verdict? I think that a jury is the most unpredictable animal in the world, so to speak, where we just never know what they're thinking. And I think the digital evidence to me is stronger than some of the other types of evidence, because I haven't heard things that I would have expected to hear, Joel, in some of the other types of evidence, like specifically, like there's a void pattern of a person standing where Paul was shot, because Paul was shot from like 3 feet away. Well, then if he's covered in blood, the shooter is covered in blood, there shouldn't be blood and all of that behind where the shooter is standing. So you should actually have a location of where that happened. And so we didn't really hear that in all the other types of physical evidence that they were presenting. So I think the digital evidence has been the strongest piece of forensic evidence that they've had in this case. I really do. I think that it's been very surprising to me sometimes, because I'm like, wow, I didn't even know that a phone could do that, So yeah, for sure. I think it's the strongest forensic evidence they have.
The other day I was talking to my friend about something, about a car, I believe it was. And moments later I was talking and it appeared on my Facebook feed. So phones are listening as well right now. Melissa, I love you, Melissa, because she writes, show some love to STS and smash that like button. It helps the channel to grow. That is true. This channel is amazing, and Joel is the best and has all the best guests on. I do have the best guests. I even have Luke Bryan on, but not the country singer. Even better. Followed up by, I love this comment too, from Eagle 5. Just found you talking about Alex trial, so I'm checking you out. Good evening from South Carolina. We love you in South Carolina, so welcome. Followed here by Joanna Bell. Has the defense shown anything yet to cause reasonable doubt in the jurors? Luke, do you want to take that? And it's really the burden is on the state, right?
Right. Sure. The burden's on the state, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense doesn't have to put up evidence, but they're choosing to do so. And of course, it's necessary here. Probably the strongest witness so far for the defense. Their mechanical engineer, Sutton, yesterday, I thought he was a good witness. He kind of, because witnesses have bias. Shelley has bias, Miss Mixon has bias, Buster has bias, but math and science don't have bias, which I'm sure Dr. Pettler can talk about. But, he basically extrapolated, from my view, upon what SLED zone analysis was, the trajectory measurement. And he did a very good thing for the defense, which is why they brought him and why they paid him, which is trying to extrapolate out based on the shell casings around Maggie and saying, okay, if the shell casings are here and you extrapolate out from a trajectory into the quail pen and one into the dog pen, then the shooter's going to be here. But if you've got your barrels of your rifle on those trajectories, all right, well, they did this kind of Faro type model, which I know Dr. Pettler is very familiar with. And they really analyzed and laid down and said, well, look, based on our model, the shooter really couldn't be as tall as Alex Murdaugh, because he's about 6'3", 6'4", in any kind of natural shooting position. And even the models they put in there of a shooter in about the position to shoot Maggie, you know, to hold the gun even at your hip comfortably, which is not terribly orthodox. They were talking about 5'2" and 5'4". So I was like, you know, that's quite interesting. And I think it resonated. I think he presented pretty well. So that's something the defense has done, because people have their biases, their opinions. Clearly, Alex Murdaugh is a thief and a liar, but he's not 5'2". So, you know, the defense is presenting that theory and trying to say the things that can't lie are showing perhaps that he's incapable of shooting. It just looks like the SLED agent, Worley, never really extrapolated out on that. Now, so that's something that they did kind of above and beyond using the state's own data that they collected. So that was pretty good for them. I mean, that does cast reasonable doubt. You had the last witness today, Micah Sturgis, who had some more stuff to do with the phone, and where the OnStar puts Murdaugh versus where he is when he's making that call to Maggie. You know, he put him earlier up the driveway and said that by the time he passed the location where Maggie's phone is, that the backlight is not lit. And he also compared Maggie's steps from her phone, the last steps she ever took, which clearly after she was dead, the killer had her phone, were about 59 steps and about 31 yards. And he compared that to prior steps that were about 31 yards, but they took way fewer steps. And so the defense said, well, what does that mean? Well, it's the same distance, but after the killing, you're taking many more steps. So what does that mean? A shorter strided shooter, which is consistent with someone being shorter. So they're doing those things. The question is, when you have all the lies and other crimes, is a jury going to focus on that? Or are they just going to say, man, this guy's a lying bad guy. I think he's the type of person who would kill his family. Guilty. So they're doing what they can, but can they overcome that evidence? You know, even though they don't have the burden to disprove it, it can sometimes feel like that.
And I think there's still plenty of people up in the air. By the way, I feel bad for every other defendant in the state of South Carolina, because I just realized every attorney in that state is focused watching this Alex Murdaugh trial all day long, instead of properly taking care of their clients, I bet.
I did drive to Aiken today to handle one of my own cases. But I was listening to the testimony in the car the whole day.
J. Thomas Reset, again, a friend of the show, writes, a very smart, reasoned guy. People who do high-level financial crimes almost never do killing with their own hands. Killers and high-level frauds are two different animals, to which Dr. Pettler is shaking her head in agreement, and followed here by Michaela Seeger. I don't think he did it. He knows who did it, and it's related to the drugs and cousin Eddie, $50,000 a week to threaten and frame him. Maybe I've watched too much Ozark. Dr. Pettler, to you, we obviously have heard from a lot of forensic experts. Today we heard from one whose name is Ken Xerxes.
Yes.
It turns out he testified as an expert witness, but then admitted that he'd never been to the scene, never did a thorough analysis according to the state. What's the deal with some of these witnesses? Because I thought it came off, and people were tweeting about it, that it was highly, unprofessional. And he comes from Dr. Henry Lee's Forensic Institute.
Yes.
He's being paid to testify. Are these kind of just mouthpieces and showpieces for the defense, and did this guy get caught as such?
I know Ken personally. I've known him for many, many years. And I think that my understanding of listening to him testify was that he was asked to do a very specific task, and he was asked to review the case in a very limited capacity, is what I heard him say. And people do that with us all the time at LPA too. We'll have attorneys that'll ask one specific question. Is this case reconstructible? Or is there evidence that supports this idea or that idea? So it's not uncommon for a district attorney or for another type of attorney in a civil wrongful death case or something to ask a very limited scope type of a question in which that an expert will use all the materials that are given to the expert by the attorneys to review, and that's all that they have. So it didn't surprise me that Ken hadn't been to the scene, because what I was hearing him say was, I haven't been to the scene because that's not what they asked me to do. And of course, I haven't spoken with Ken about this case. I had no idea he was involved with it until I literally saw him on the stand. But I just thought that he was trying to say, no, I was only asked to do these little things, and they only gave me this amount of information. And so everything I did was just based on a limited question and a limited amount of material. I didn't hear every single word of his testimony, but in general, that is what I heard.
And that makes sense. We've got a comment here from Julia. The defense witness today, a partner in the law firm, turned into a great witness for the state. I love your show. Usually listen to it the next morning on my walk. Just a reminder, you can listen to us anywhere you find podcasts, Apple podcasts, Spotify, Audible, etc., etc. Blue Jays writes, and Luke and Brian, this one obviously it's for you. We'll take another comment or two and then have you guys give your final thoughts. Blue Jays writes, prosecutor should play the kennel tape. Is that you on the tape? You said you weren't at the kennel. What else did you lie about? I withdraw that question. I don't know if they mean withdraw, and sit down. Is that something that they should, that the state will do? And is that a mic drop moment? Is it better, I guess, Luke, for the state to be succinct and nail him and then just walk away, or to drag it out? Because Kilo writes here too, Jodi Arias was on the stand for 3 weeks, LOL. So better to be succinct and just walk away, or no?
It is. Brevity is always better. But you want to, if you're the prosecutor and you get a defendant like Alex Murdaugh up there, it's tempting to just go on and on and on. When he testifies, and he will, $100 bet, he will certainly be asked about that Snapchat video at the kennels, but he will, through direct, already have mea culpa and totally explain that. I mean, they know that's bad. They know he's totally busted. It's the linchpin, really, of the state's case for showing he's right there at the time of the murders or just before. And so he's going to come out with some kind of explanation that he feels is the most helpful. Now, whether it's the truth or not, the jury can decide, but it's going to have to be something like, you know what, I was scared. I'm a former prosecutor. I knew that they were going to treat me as a suspect. So you know what? When they asked me where I was, I just said, no, I wasn't down there, because I want them spending their time catching the real killer. So I didn't want to have myself be a suspect. He'll probably say something like that and go, now I know I should have just been entirely honest. The truth would have come out anyway. But he's going to have to come out like something like that to soften the hammer blow that will be coming from the prosecution. But they certainly will walk him through every lie he's ever told that's documented in this case, and then go, you're under oath now. You were lying then. Why aren't you lying now? And that's going to be the point of the cross. And it will be dramatic. I don't know if it's going to be Metters or Waters doing it. I would suspect Metters has cross-examined way more murder defendants than Waters, but Waters probably knows the financial case a lot better, and so he'll use that as a stick to beat Alex Murdaugh with. But yeah, so that will definitely be a feature of it, but he'll try to get ahead of it.
And Mabel, who has a special place in my heart, because and she knows this, my beloved Mabel Rose of 17 years, my dog before my wife and 3 kids, just passed away. And Mabel's watching from El Salvador, and I told her that story. So thanks so much for this comment too, Joel. Your lives are amazing. Love the guests as usual. That's because we have the best guests, and I learn a lot from them, as do I. Today is also the case, learning lots. How could you not, from Dr. Pettler and Brian and Luke? This is an interesting comment. We'll probably make this the last comment and then start to wrap this up. But Peggy Kenny writes, have you heard that they extracted information from Alex Murdaugh's phone that he was looking for a restaurant and was looking at female friends' swimsuit pictures? That part I did not hear while on the phone with 9/11. But Dr. Pettler, to you, apparently he was doing Google searches after that 911 call, and literally moments, I think, before or after the first deputy arrived on scene, of a seafood restaurant nearby. How damning is that?
I have not heard that. That is the very first time, Joel, that I've heard that. So, of course, nothing surprises me in this case, and nothing surprises me from Alex Murdaugh either. So, no, that would not be surprising. And again, pathology trumps intelligence. And one of the things I think is very important for viewers to remember, and this is just from being involved in so many murder cases from almost the past 22 years now. The case file that we have on murders is never the entire, what's presented in the courtroom is never the entire case file that the DA's office might have on a case, or that the defense lawyers might have on a case. And it's just been my experience that, of course, attorneys like Luke and Brian, they decide what evidence is what they want to put up in a courtroom. And so, I don't think we're ever going to know the full scope of all of this. And when it comes to crime scene reconstruction, it is an approximate estimation at best. Even when we're using Faro, even when we're using my kaleidoscope system, even when we're using any LizQ or whatever system that you want to use, it is always an approximate estimation at best, and it has limitations. And the results of a crime scene reconstruction must be applied within the totality of the scope of evidence, and not just an isolated, limited piece of evidence. So those are just that's just my initial thought on that whole thing with that type of evidence and his Google searches and just all of it in totality. I think it just wraps it up from that standpoint. I think he told us what this was about. It was about the boat case. You can't rule out two shooters, but that doesn't make him any less guilty if he is involved.
And at the end of the day, those jurors will decide. Luke Shealy, ladies and gentlemen, the handsome brother, twin without the beard, a native of South Carolina, the better of the two attorneys, according to him. He began his career as a public defender. He is now obviously a seasoned defense attorney and was appointed to his first death penalty case back in 2013. Your final thoughts, Luke. Where do we go from here? But first, answer this question from Elf. Will the defense make Alec try on the raincoat on the stand? Are we going to have an OJ moment here in this case?
Maybe. I mean, it was pretty clear that they wanted, and they have established that he, at the time, was a 2X, and the raincoat is a large, although it kind of seems like a large, a rather large size. So, Alex, due to the conditions at the jail, has shrank quite a bit. You don't exactly get the best jail food. And so I think he's probably, just by looking at him, lost 50, 60 pounds. So I don't know that you want him to try that on and then have it fit perfectly. So I think you probably stay away from that. And they've already had the housekeeper, Blanca, talk about him being a large, and other people to push off on the raincoat. But if I could just follow up on that last question, I mean, Alex has got a lot of explaining to do and a lot of problems, but he wasn't searching any scantily clad women or anything. He did receive a text on a group thread of all men at 10:22 per the timeline from Michael.
I hadn't heard about the women, but I heard he was Googling whalies, which is a seafood.
And I'm sure he'll have to explain that. I've been to that restaurant a lot. It's in Edisto. It might have been his search history or I don't know, but there's nothing. It's just a family restaurant. But
there's apparently a Maggie's favorite burger on that menu.
Yeah, maybe. But he did receive a group text from Michael Gunn, who's the guy of Forge Consulting, who had the fake accounts with, who said, "Hey, hey boys, she she brought the heat from Miami, boys, and clearly he's not aware of what's going on with Mr. Murdaugh. It's sent to about 5 guys, and it does show that Murdaugh read it, meaning like looked at it, but he's also calling Christy Murdaugh, Rogan Gibson, texting. So it's clearly coming in as he's doing things. So I don't think he's actually
talking about bad timing on it.
Point. So I will defend him at least in that respect.
No, it's good. I'm glad he's still got a scintilla of decency. By the way, I'm in Miami. I won't comment on bringing heat. Brian Shealy worked for 5 years at the Richland County, South Carolina Public Defender's Office before establishing, notice he established it, not Luke. Brian established the Shealy Law Firm and has spent the majority of his legal career defending the most violent charges, including clients charged with murder, armed robbery, rape, and burglary. Peach Pie writes, Brian, had AM kept quiet, he'd have a good shot beating this. His words alone prove his guilt. Your thoughts and your final thoughts on where we go from here.
Absolutely. He's talked too much. He's given 4 statements. He's caught in 1,000 lies. If he doesn't testify, his voice will still be ringing out in closing from the rehab facility, talking about how sorry he is for lying to police. So, yeah, I mean, without the 4 different recorded interviews, maybe there's a credible argument that he would have won on directed verdict. But because he talks so much, and I'm sure the doctor has lots of thoughts about why he would feel the need to get out in front of us in so many different ways, but because of this, the only chance he's got is to testify. So I don't want to take that bet because I think we're betting on the same theory here, but he's going to have to get up there and explain why he's a liar and somehow find a way for the jury to find him believable, which will be tough.
And time will tell if he does take the stand. Dr. Laura Pettler, all you have to know about her, she's one of the most accomplished forensic scientists in America. Back in 2019, was recognized as the most influential woman in forensics. She was part of the Oz team forensic criminologist as they won an Emmy for that. To you, Dr. Pettler, this final comment, even the sled point backfired because he admitted he got blood on him just walking through a doorway at that crime scene. How does Alec have no blood? You sort of explained that, but from a forensic standpoint, will all the forensics in this case come back to bite him in the behind?
You know, I'm glad that you asked this question, Joel, because some of the comments from the listeners and your viewers, they were talking about the blood and how could he not have blood on him? And, you know, what Rex is saying, even though the sled point backfired, he admitted he got blood walking through a doorway. How does Alex have no blood? You know, a lot of offenders that stage murders, they don't have blood on them because they take showers or they somehow they wear Tyvek, they kill naked. I mean, they do all kinds of things to mitigate risk. And so it's possible that he could have blood on him or could not have blood on him, but the house wasn't processed, to my understanding. And if correct me guys if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the house was not part of the CSI on the night of the murders. And so the opportunities to process the house for blood might have been limited. So to Rex's question, yes, I mean, there can be blood that's still wet, but then blood is also going to be, if it's coagulated and the serum is separated from the cells, which begins like 15 minutes or so after blood leaves the body, those coagulated areas could be definitely still wet, which could account for why some people had blood on them. And then, you know, why Alex doesn't have blood on him. He might not have touched those areas and still touch the bodies. I mean, there's so many variables to consider. We would have to sit here for weeks discussing them all because they're literally just that many when it comes to these things. But usually a murder boils down to conflict resolution and benefit. And it's usually pretty simple. And I think that the fact that he mentioned the boat case on 911 and he mentioned the boat case immediately to investigators, to us in our matrix at LPA, that flags immediately. What are they telling you? Because the verbal staging, the oral staging, it's usually consistent with that. I don't know if there's one shooter or two shooters, but I do know that Alex Murdaugh's, the evidence presented in this trial is consistent with him having been present at the kennels around the time of the murders. And he would have been, in my opinion, if he is guilty, Joel, if he's involved in these murders of his wife and daughter, or his wife and son, to me, and I've said this on Court TV as well, he would have been better off to say, I was there. I was there when Maggie and Paul when we were viciously attacked by a group of people or two people. They had masks on. They were wearing dark clothing. I never could see them. And they shot my wife and they shot my son. And, I am the lone survivor. Do we see that also in staged murders? Yes, we do. But to me, like, if on the is Alex innocent side, that would have sold a lot better, because it would have explained everything from, not the blood on the steering wheel, no, for sure, but the other aspects of why he's there. He could have been there, but cognitive overload with stagers is very common. They lose sight of all the details, and they can't keep everything straight of what they're lying about. So then that's usually where they get caught. We don't usually catch them in the scene. We catch them in post-crime behaviors.
And Luke, I'll turn that question I asked you on to myself. What would I do different if I was the state? I would have called Dr. Laura Pettler to the witness stand, because what you just said, that is a conviction from what I'm hearing her say right now. If I'm a juror, conviction. But the only people that matter right now are those jurors. Natalie says, and Natalie, she matters. Alex Murdaugh will not walk. He is a danger to society and unstable. I would have to agree that he is certainly not the most stable horse in the stable. And with that said, just a quick programming note, we will be live again tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern time, a special time for your true crime fill. On Friday, we will be live at 12:30 p.m. Eastern time on Friday, and Sunday night with my dear, lovely mother hosting with me, 7 p.m. Eastern time. And STS Nation, let me know what you think of these lives. We were doing them for a bit. We stopped, but with this trial allegedly winding down, we decided to go live until the end, which we will do, because I'm a man of my word, although I'm wilting because it's a lot of work. But we appreciate you tuning in. Dr. Pettler, thank you so much. Glad you got your audio situation fixed.
I'm sorry.
It's all good. And Brian and Luke, you guys are awesome and handsome according to STS Nation. So we'll bring you back, and I won't call you Luke Brian again. With that, love you, America.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.